Good afternoon and welcome to our first lunch of this semester. Glad that all of you could join us today. I'd like to ask you all to make sure you turn off your cell phones or silence them, as I will do myself. And we'll begin with the invocation and pledge, and I'll invite up Aaron Lingenfelter, a senior majoring in political science, minors in theater and music, correct? And you, all the Ashbrooks, you all know, have to write a thesis each year. And yours is on James Madison and the Constitutional Convention. And can I invite them all to your defense? She really doesn't want me to invite you all, but on April 11th, she's going to be defending her thesis in the Ashbrook Center. So we have seating for about 150. If any of you would like to come up and but all the students have to do a thesis, public thesis defense as well for other students and other faculty. So, Aaron, please.
Please bow your heads with me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to gather here and engage in a discourse that may expand our minds. We thank you for the men and women of our armed forces who make so many sacrifices so that we may come together in this way. We ask that you grant them strength and your divine protection. Thank you for the meal that has been provided. Please bless the hands that have prepared and served it. We ask for wisdom for our country's leaders and citizens and for a blessed future for the United States of America. Please open our minds to the speaker's words this afternoon. In your name we pray. Amen. And will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Of course, all of you know that we bring these wonderful speakers to campus each year to spend time with our Ashbrook scholars. That's really why they are all here, and our speaker today will be spending time with the students immediately following today's lunch. I'd like to ask all of the Ashbrook scholars to take a stand for us and take a bow so we can welcome you. We have just about 120 students in the program right now. We're going to be taking that up to 180 students 4 years from now. So the number of them in this room will be growing over the next few years. We're also very pleased that many teachers accept our invitation to bring some high school students to these luncheons. And we have Fairfield Christian Academy, Knox County Career Center, Lexington High School, Lorain County Joint Vocational School, Madison High School, and Norwayne High School students with us today. So welcome. A number of their teachers are also involved in our work at Ashbrook for teachers. We have a variety of programs that we offer all across the country for teachers. And Mike Catherine from Lexington High School and Joe Sismadia from Lorain County Joint Vocational School and Brad Hellenthal from Norwayne are all graduates of our MA program. So thanks to you and all the other teachers here for bringing your students with us today. You have cards on your table for questions following our speaker's talk today. Students will be coming around to pick up questions. Please feel free to write down some questions on there. High school students as well. Please don't be shy about that. And students will bring up questions for us to ask after the talk. In your program, you have a list of all of the people who have very generously supported our students at these luncheons to make it possible for our students, to make it possible for the high school students to attend today. So I'd like to thank everybody who is making that possible. We're very grateful for that. You also have on your program a list of the upcoming events, including our events up in the Ashbrook Center with Professor Gordon Lloyd this Friday, in April with Professor Cantor. And then in April, we will continue this series with Ohio Supreme Court Justice Judy French on April 22nd. So I hope you all will be able to join us for those events. To introduce our speaker today, I will invite up Joe Griffith, a senior majoring in political science and history, yes. His thesis is, this is the title, The Life of the Nation, Lincoln's Use of Biblical Allusions in the Gettysburg Address. And all of you are also invited to his thesis defense in case you cannot make Aaron's on April 11th. His is on April 30th up in the Ashbrook Center. So I hope a couple of you may stop by. Joe?
Good afternoon. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce the esteemed Brian Wesbury today, the Wall Street Journal's #1 U.S. forecaster in 2001 and one of USA Today's top 10 economic forecasters in 2004. In 1995 and 1996, Mr. Wesbury served as the chief economist for the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress. Since 1999, he has been a member of the Academic Advisory Council of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. In 2012, he was named a fellow of the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, Texas, where he works closely with its 4% growth project. Currently, Mr. Wesbury is the chief economist at First Trust Advisors, LP, a financial services firm based in Wheaton, Illinois. Mr. Wesbury's writings appear in various magazines, newspapers, and blogs, and he appears regularly on Fox, Bloomberg, and CNBC. His most recent book, It's Not As Bad As You Think, was published in November 2009. Mr. Wesbury received an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg Graduate School of Management and a BA in economics from the University of Montana. In today's world, navigating the noisy echo chamber of economics and financial markets calls for an antidote to conventional wisdom. Brian Wesbury is just that, and today he promises to help us cut through the noise of our very busy world. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Brian Wesbury.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Joe, thank you very much. That was great. Awesome. Roger, thank you for having Victoria. Thank you. But, you know, Jim and Maureen Buchwald saw me speak how long ago? 20 years ago? 20? We're not that old. So, yeah, you're not that old. Anyway, I've been in Knox County a number of times, but this is my first time here with you. And I got to tell you, I was met by Lisa at the door. I don't remember Lisa's last name, but I was at the door last night. She let me into this building next door, which I think is a dorm. And on top of that dorm is an apartment, a suite, a beautiful suite that I stayed in last night. Had a great night's sleep. But as I kind of went in and got situated in the room, I walked into this back area, and there on the wall are pictures of Ronald Reagan, George Will, Baker, Margaret Thatcher, and they've all spoken here. And I have to tell you, my thought was, what am I doing here? I guess a better question is, what are you doing? Anyway, it's unbelievable to stand on this stage. It's great to be with you. And you know, part of my problem these days is we don't have all day and all night to be together, so there's no possible way we can cover everything that's on your mind. It's utterly impossible. There's 65 things at least, and each one of them, to do them justice, would take us 15, 20, 30 minutes each, and so we don't have the time. So I get to give you what I think are the important takeaways, or at least the way I look at the world. We'll have time for some questions, and that'll be it. But that's our dive into this. And so let me start out with what I've been doing just recently. In the last 2.5 weeks, three weeks now, I have read the transcripts, every word uttered in an official Federal Reserve meeting from the year 2008. Okay? Now, just so you know, these transcripts are released, the verbatim transcripts are released 5 years after the year is over. So we just got the '08, 49 weeks from now we'll get the '09. But I read, it's 559,000 words. Put that in perspective, it's the Old Testament is 593,000 words. All right. In the Old Testament, the universe was created. We wandered around in the desert for 40 years. The earth flooded. A lot of stuff. Literally, the Fed. That's how much they talk. All right. And I want to start there because my belief is that most people's view of the economy today, and especially financial markets, is influenced, I think, to too great of an extent by what happened in 2008. If you really think about it, it was trauma. I love good words. Trauma is a great word. It was a traumatic event. I mean, you remember it. Stocks going down, bonds going down, gold went down, oil went down, the value of your house went down. Doesn't matter where you lived, all right? Everything went down. Everyone in this room at some point in that winter sat down with their spouse. You remember the conversation. Honey, at least we have each other. Because that's it, all right? And even if we have something left today, we won't tomorrow. It was traumatic. And my view is that what we have taken away from that is a view of the world I personally think is wrong. Well, we've taken something else away from it, and that is we have post-traumatic stress disorder. All right, and I'm not making fun of that. I've never been to war myself. I don't have a family member that's been to war. I'm not a psychologist. But post-traumatic, the only experience I ever had with what I think was PTSD was on a golf course, believe it or not. Back in the 1980s, we picked up these two guys I didn't know. A helicopter flew right over us on the 8th tee, and somebody thought it was funny to yell, incoming. And one of the guys that we picked up hit the dirt. And I don't mean hit the dirt. He hugged the earth. His reaction scared me. All right? And then he got up, dusted himself off, picked up his bag, and left. In my mind, that's PTSD, okay? That wherever his mind was transported at that moment, he was scared for his life, he was shaken to his core, and he didn't know what to do with himself. He left, all right? And isn't that the way investing has felt in the last 5 years? I assume you wouldn't be here unless you cared about economics or investing. Obviously you care about Ashland and Ashbrook, but what I mean is to listen to somebody talk about this stuff. We all have a front row seat to this in a way. I do TV. It's not, there's nothing spectacular about it. It's TV. That's it. But I remember a few times over the past few years, and I think it describes what we're living through. August of '09, maybe it was July of '09. So if you remember, the market bottomed in March of 2009. It was up it went up real strongly, like right away after the bottom. And so they have me on CNBC. I get my little earpiece in. I think that guy Nouriel Roubini was on right before me, okay? So I don't know if you remember him, but they were asking him what's going on, and he's market's up, Nouriel. What do you think? He goes, "Oh, this is a dead cat bounce. It cannot last. The world is coming to an end any day now, and the market's going to go back down." And they're like, they called him Dr. Doom, and they're like, "You are a genius. You're brilliant. Thank you for coming on our show. We're so happy that you were here. I wish you didn't have to go because now we got that Wesbury guy." All right. And so then they come to me and they're like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, I think, the economy's going to recover. It's not going to boom. I think the market's really cheap. I think we're going to be okay. And then they drop the bomb on me. What about Dubai? Now think about that question for a second. I'm like, you mean where it is? Is this a geography test? It's like, I'm like, no, everybody knew what they meant. Dubai was in financial trouble, and if they went down, they'd be like a domino, and they'd knock all the other dominoes down, and we were the last domino, and we would go back into 2008. The trauma, right? That's what they meant. And I'm like, look, Dubai is teeny. It's really, really small. We're big. America is strong. Like, we'll be okay. And then my 3 minutes were up. All right, boom. So a couple months later, they call me back. And they say, I remember Mary says, they want you on Tuesday. And I'm like, Mary, they're going to tell me how right I was about Dubai. I went to the bathroom. I was practicing being humble in the mirror. You know, I was ready for this. I went on air, and they didn't mention Dubai once. And I want you to think about that. Over the last 5 years, how many things have been going to take us out, and then they don't take us out, and then they never talk about them again. They didn't come back and say, well, this is why Dubai didn't take us out. They didn't come back and say, well, we were wrong. They just ignore it. They just move on to the next thing. So now I'm on the air. What do you think's going on? I said, I think the market's cheap. I think we're going to keep growing. It's early 2000. And they're like, what about the BP oil spill? I'm like, you don't know where that is either? I'm like, look, I've never been a mile deep in the Gulf. I mean, I'm on CNBC. I'm like, have any of you, like, you anchors, you're acting like you have? They've now, by the way, every anchor on TV has flown a 777 Boeing jet too. But nonetheless, I'm like, they're going to plug the thing. I'm sure there's a plumber working on it right now. All right. And I will be all right. And this has gone on for 5 years. Fiscal cliffs, sequesters, debt downgrades, tapering, not tapering, more QE, not enough QE. All right? Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ukraine, on and on and on. So the last time I was on, they were like, what about Cyprus? I'm like, here we go again. It's tiny. It's really, really small. Actually, I want to tell you what I said on air. I still kind of can't believe I said this, but I'm like, look, we did the work. The economy of Cyprus is exactly the same size as the economy of Green Bay, Wisconsin. I said, I live in Chicago. Most people here really don't care what happens to Green Bay. It's a football joke, all right? All right, we care about the people. They're really nice, all that, but their football team can go. Anyway, and they were like, did he just say that? And I my whole point, I think you get it, is that this nonsense that we've lived through for the past 5 years is all because of the trauma and what we were told about that winter of '08. And what I believe about that winter, I'm going to just cut to the chase here, and then I'm going to try and prove it a little bit, is that it was never as bad as people thought it was. That if you add up all the subprime loans that were made, there were subprime loans made that did not stand a chance of staying whole for 30 days. There were people that lied. They didn't have a job, but they said they made 80 grand last year. They signed a mortgage. They borrowed money. They didn't have a chance to make the first payment. All right? And I guarantee you there were loans made like that. We all know it. But when you add it all up, when you add up all of those bad loans, it was about $400 billion. And the economy was $15 trillion, and private citizens in America today have $200 trillion of assets. Back then had about $180 trillion worth of assets. So I'm sorry, $400 billion is a lot of money, but it's tiny compared to the size of the economy and the size of the assets. It never was going to take down the U.S., ever. What caused the problem to become bigger is an accounting rule. And I know this is, like, you came to a lunch to hear about an accounting rule. Oh, great, all right? It's called mark-to-market accounting. And mark-to-market accounting hasn't been around since 1938. FDR actually ended mark-to-market accounting in 1938. It made its comeback in November of 2007, and the minute we brought it back, we went into a traumatic financial crisis. And what's wrong with mark-to-market accounting is really very simple. All you have to do in mark-to-market accounting is to call up 3 traders and get 3 bids, and then you take the price of the bid, and that's what the value of the asset is. All right? The problem is when there's no market, when markets dry up and become illiquid, the prices for assets do not resemble what they're really worth. And so what we did is we took a $400 billion problem, and because markets became illiquid, we turned it into a trillions of dollar problem. And then instead of trying to fix the accounting rule, instead of fixing the accounting rule, instead we came up with all these government programs to fill the hole that mark-to-market accounting was making in balance sheets. Okay? And so let me put some numbers sort of on this, or a model, so that you can sort of understand this. A mortgage-backed security. Okay? We take 1,000 mortgages, we package them all up into one security, and then we sell pieces of it. So forget about all the details. It's just 1,000 mortgages in one bond. Okay? Let's say 300 of those mortgages go bad. All right? 30% of them. Bad. People stop paying. They're in default. These people are bankrupt. If you're a bank, you got a problem. They're not paying on their asset. But the other 700 are still paying. So you have 1,000 mortgages, 70% of them are paying. What's that bond worth? On a cash flow basis, because 70% of them are still paying, it's worth at least 70 cents on the dollar. Okay, because 70% are still paying. Now, by the way, of the 300 mortgages that went bad, you're going to recover something. You're going to sell the house, and maybe it's 40 cents on the dollar. So you should add that back in too. But forget that. It's worth 70 cents. But in 2008 and early 2009, there was no market. People wouldn't touch mortgage-backed securities. So guess what the bid was for those securities? 10 cents. So now what the bank is forced to do with mark-to-market accounting rules is to price that asset at 10 cents even though it's paying 70 cents. And that difference, that hole in the balance sheet, is what the government was trying to fill. That's why it invented quantitative easing. That's why it invented TARP. That's why it invented all those programs, because it was trying to fill that hole. Now, there's not enough time today to go into this, but there's no way the government could have filled that hole. Because in a mark-to-market accounting world, once you get started spiraling downward, you never stop until all the leverage is out of the system completely. Okay? It would never end. So as long as mark-to-market accounting was in place, it would never end. And here's a perfect chart of what I'm talking about. This is the stock market during all of 2008 and then the first half of 2009. And if you look at these little red dots, every one of these, I got a purple pen here today, so just in your honor. Every one of these little red dots is a Federal Reserve meeting. Every one of these red dots means that the Federal Reserve, they invented a program, all right, to buy assets, or they cut interest rates, or they increased the size of their programs, or they did something. Okay? And every time they did it, the market kept going down and down and down and down. In fact, there's a perfect example of this. One of the most important people at the Federal Reserve is a guy named Bill Dudley. You don't have to read this. I'll read it to you. He said, this is in September of 2008. He said, our strategy all along has been not to prevent the deleveraging or the unwinding that developed earlier, but to stretch it out a little so fewer things break. So we're throwing liquidity into the system to keep things from breaking. That's what we want to do. That's what the Fed is trying to do. Then he adds, obviously, things are still breaking. Duh. All right. Obviously, things are still breaking. And he says, even with all the tools we've rolled out. So, now what do you think he says? So we're going to quit? No. So I think that just suggests that more force needs to be applied. So the Fed's already put $2.5 trillion out there, and they're going to put more. See, I believe the Fed's a hammer. It's a hammer. And when you're a hammer, every problem is a nail. And if the nail won't go in, you just hammer harder. And now, I get to say all this with, I believe, a clean conscience. Because in 2008, I was having meetings at First Trust in my president's office talking about our business, talking about our customers who are financial advisors, their clients who are all investors. What do we do? What do we say? What do we do for our business? What do we do for theirs? How do we help people? And we kept coming back to one thing: mark-to-market accounting, mark-to-market accounting, mark-to-market accounting. They just have to change that. I was on telephone calls with the Treasury. They had calls when Fannie and Freddie and Lehman and Bear went down. I was on all of those calls. I kept saying mark-to-market every chance I got. I have phone numbers for Federal Reserve Board governors. I was calling them and talking to them about it, and the Fed refused, and the Treasury refused to do any of it, to even look at it, to think that it was a problem. Now they know better, but we actually have a little bit of proof. Now, just for one quick second, in all of the 559,000 words of the 2008 minutes, they mentioned mark-to-market accounting 19 times. All right, that's not very many out of 559,000 words, but 8 of those times was in their last meeting, December 15th of 2008. So it was all of a sudden, I like to think I was part of it. I wasn't the only one. Newt Gingrich, Steve Forbes, Bill Isaac, there were a bunch of people that were saying this was a problem. But all of a sudden they had it on their radar. And here's Elizabeth Duke, who was a banker, and her job was to kind of report back what banks were saying to the Fed. She's a governor. That's kind of the role she took. And she said every single bank was adamant about the evils of mark-to-market accounting and other than temporary impairment. And then she said banks won't sell because they don't believe the prices, and they won't buy securities because they don't believe the prices. And then here's the money sentence. She said there is some speculation that the mark-to-market losses will absorb all of the TARP capital that was just injected. TARP was a $700 billion program to give capital to banks. Remember, what I said is these were all designed to fill the hole between what the asset was really worth and what the market, illiquid market, there was really no trading going on, price was. And so they were trying to fill that hole. And they couldn't fill it. And here's the real point. This is right in here is when they did quantitative easing and TARP. And between this point and here, the bottom in March, the market fell 40%. After they did TARP. After they invented quantitative easing. So if you want to believe that the banking system, the idiots in the banking system, created the crisis and then the government saved us, you have a real problem. Because they didn't save us. They pumped in trillions of dollars and the market kept going down and down and down and down. And then on March 9th of 2009, and this is always a shocker for some people, especially conservatives, Barney Frank and his banking committee decided to have a hearing and call FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, onto the carpet and force them to change mark-to-market accounting rules. And that was the day the market bottomed. And ever since then, all of a sudden, prices have come back in, investments into banks have picked up, TARP money has been paid back, the economy has grown, and the stock market has continued to go up in spite of Cyprus and Dubai and the BP oil spill and Ukraine and Greece and sequester and fiscal cliff and Obamacare, all right? All of it. And so one of the things that people will say to me is this: okay, Wesbury, all right. You may be right, but I still believe that quantitative easing has affected our economy, and that's the only reason we're growing. And here's a picture of it. This is the monetary base. The Federal Reserve did QE1, QE2, QE3. They bought $3.5 trillion worth of assets, bonds in the market. They're injecting money in, and all of that is boosting the economy. That's why the stock market is up. It's a sugar high, right? You eat a cookie, you feel better for a few hours, then it goes away. all right? It's a sugar high. When they take this away, everything is going to collapse. And I put this chart up here for a reason, and that is, what I did here is I compared the monetary base. This is what we call high-powered money. Remember, when the Federal Reserve puts $1 into the banking system, the banks take it, they lend it around, and they turn it into 10. It's called the money multiplier. I would highly recommend you take the money in banking class or talk to an econ professor here. They'll tell you all about it. It's one of it's the coolest things to learn in economics there is. Okay? But what happened back here is that the banking system decided not to use it. And I believe there's a reason for that. Because the Federal Reserve said, we're going to put all this money in banks, we want you to lend it out. But then they also said, but be ready, because when the economy gets better, we're going to take the money back. So if you're a bank, why would you lend out money that the Fed's going to take back any day now? I mean, it might be 9 months, it might be a year, but are you going to make a loan to somebody? I'm going to open a new restaurant, and I need an oven and some tables and paint the walls, and then next thing you know, the bank's saying, I got to take the loan back. You said, but I haven't even opened yet. And I'm like, sorry, the Fed wants the money back. So what banks did is they refused to lend out the quantitative easing. The M2 measure of money, that's what this gold line, it grew 6% over the last 5 years, even though the Federal Reserve has injected 32% more money every year. This is why gold's not $5,000 an ounce. It's why Glenn Beck and Ron Paul have been wrong about hyperinflation. In my opinion, it's also proves that it's not QE that drove economic growth. And so that brings me to a question. Okay? All right, if Wesbury, if it's not quantitative easing that drove growth, if that's not what drove growth, what did? What did drive growth? Okay, and I think this is really, in fact, the most important question. Over the last 5 years, the economy, we've added jobs now for 47 consecutive months, private sector jobs. Believe me, they're only growing at 170,000 a month. They should be 300,000 a month. All right? The economy's grown. It's grown about 2% a year. It should be 4%. All right? We have labor force participation rate is down. It should be higher. There's a lot of things that are true. The economy is, I call it the plow horse economy. It's a plow horse. It ain't a racehorse. It ain't going to win the Kentucky Derby, but at the same time, it ain't heading for the glue factory either. It just keeps plodding along. So why? Why is it growing? All right, and my answer to that is one word. And I didn't learn this word from Ludwig von Mises, but he taught me what it meant. Entrepreneurship. The entrepreneur in America is alive and well. And what entrepreneurs do is that they look at a mosaic of the world, the beautiful mosaic that the world is today. And they can take little pieces of that mosaic, little lights, however you want to think of it, and they can remove them, and they can rearrange them in a way that's never been arranged before. Sam Walton, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, I don't know who, you may not like any of them, all right? But they're entrepreneurs. Sam Walton reinvented the retail landscape. He took the mosaic as it existed and put it together in a different way. And that's what entrepreneurs do. And what entrepreneurs have done in recent years is create a whole new world. Fracking, 3D printing. The world, Texas alone is sitting on multiples, 6 or 7 Saudi Arabian-sized holdings of oil. And it's fracking that brought it out. Oil is not a commodity business. It's a technology business. Fracking, we hit 99 wells, 99 out of 100 that we drill. More, actually. Wildcatters, remember them? They weren't just wild, crazy people, all over, a lot of them were. But they were risk takers, huge. They hit 10% of the wells they drilled. All right, 3D printing. You remember dot matrix printers? Remember those things? You would never write a letter on a dot matrix printer. You had this Selectric around the corner, you know, the little ball thing. And that's what you'd write a letter. Well, now we all have laser printers in our house, in our office. You'd write a letter to anybody. all right, on one, okay, unless you want it to be handwritten. All right, your grandkids, they're all going to have a 3D printer in their house just like you have a laser printer in your house. They're going to order stuff off of Amazon, and they're going to print it. No, it's not even going to have to be delivered. All right? And so what's happening today is that that's changing the world. The cloud, the smartphone, the tablet, the apps, they're changing the world. These are the greatest technologies. I believe the cloud, the smartphone, the tablet, and apps are more powerful than the PC and the internet were in the 1990s. Okay? Now, what's fascinating today is that what lots of people are doing, in fact, I want to show you something that Alan Greenspan put out. Okay? How many of you are on Twitter? Ashbrook's been tweeting that I'm going to come, and I'm on Twitter. I'm following. I love Twitter. At the end of last year, they sort of had a contest on Twitter. It wasn't really a contest. It was sort of like, it said, tweet your chart of the year. And it's perfect for that, because you get a little chart, you blow it up on your screen, you look at it. Charts are cool, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. All these great charts are coming out. Well, the Washington Post put out a chart by Alan Greenspan, the chart of the year. Okay? And here's the chart. Okay? So here's Alan Greenspan's chart. He did this right here is the 30-year Treasury yield minus the 5-year Treasury yield, and then he inverted it. So in other words, what this shows is that the 30-year yield is way above the 5-year. And the whole point he's making is, hey, if the 30-year yield is way up here and the 5-year yield is way down here, and in fact the spread's wider than it's been since 1953, that shows that people are really uncertain about the future. Because gosh, you got to pay me a lot more to be out there 30 years than 5. So the wider this spread is, the more uncertain I am, okay? And then he added something else onto this. This is the blue line. And what this shows is business investment as a percent of business cash flow. Okay? So the lower this goes, the less of cash flow businesses are investing. So you've heard that businesses are sitting on a pile of cash today, right? All they do is they pile the cash. I mean, Apple could buy Cyprus, okay? All right? I mean, they just, and they're not investing. And that's what this proves. They're not hiring, they're not investing. So I want to talk about Alan Greenspan is convinced that this shows how uncertain the world is, how uncertain businesses are, and why the Federal Reserve should keep using force and keep hammering, keep interest rates low, because we got to get this economy going again. Do you remember Blockbuster? Remember Blockbuster? All right. They had, by the way, they had 9,000 stores and 60,000 employees. Their competitor at the time was called Hollywood Video. Their big competitor. There's mom and pops out there too. Hollywood Video, 4,700 stores, 33,000 employees. Add them all up, it's like 14,000 stores, 90,000 employees to get us videos. Brick and mortar, parking lots, glass windows, cash registers, counters, employees, racks, and all this stuff on the tape, videotape, plastic, all this stuff to get us videos. Who took them out? Netflix. How many employees does Netflix have? Somebody answered the other day, 2. Which you kind of start hearing those stories, and you're right. But no, they actually have 2,000 employees. What kind of real estate do they own? Not much. A couple office buildings, a warehouse with servers in it, backup warehouse with backup servers in it. All right, that's it. Does Netflix have higher profit margins or lower profit margins than Blockbuster? A lot higher. See, Netflix has a 64-inch pipe to deliver video content. They only use 30 inches of that 64-inch pipe. And by the way, they deliver more videos than Blockbuster or Hollywood Video ever dreamed of delivering. They only need, Alan Greenspan, what he's saying is if they don't build this out to 156 or 312, if they don't build a bigger pipe, 256 I guess, or 512, then they're not certain of the future. But they already have 64 and they only need 30. And they're making better profit margins. So why should they invest their cash in something they don't need? And in fact, if they wait 6 months to build to 128 inches, it's going to cost half as much. So this idea that somehow businesses are all uncertain, it doesn't, like I already said, when we frack, we hit 99% of the time. We're more efficient. So if we drilled the same number of wells wildcatting, we would hit 10% of the time. We'd spend 10 times more to hit the same number of wells. And so what's happening today is that we're investing less because the returns are more certain. It's not less certain, it's more certain. And that's why we're growing, because of entrepreneurship. Do you remember that movie Cannonball Run? Remember that thing? Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise. This is a true story, right? They raced cars from the Red Ball Garage in downtown Manhattan all the way to the beach in LA, Long Beach, I think it was. And these were on surface roads, highways, all that stuff, and Dom DeLuise is running from the cops, and it's hilarious. But these are real stories, okay? Well, last year, this 26-year-old kid set the record. 99.9 miles an hour all the way across the country without a ticket. And by the way, there's not NASCARs or Formula One. He had a nice little Mercedes. It wasn't the top of the line. It wasn't the bottom of the line. You should see the cockpit of his car. 2 iPads, 3 iPhones, a CB radio, and a radar detector. It looked like the space shuttle. You know what his most important tool was? This app called Trapster. See, I'm old enough I remember CB radios. In Missouri, we used them all the time. Breaker, breaker, 19. You know, there's a Smokey at mile marker 22 with his eyes on. All right, and that's what Trapster is. You put that into the app. Mile marker 22, sheriff with radar. And then it's got GPS, knows where you are, it tells you where all the cops are. This is the most important tool. 99.9 miles an hour, set the record. Nobody's even gotten, he blew it away. All right? Now, I'm not trying to make the case that Trapster is going to transform our world, okay? Transforms driving for a lot of people, but nonetheless, what I'm getting to here is that that's the app world. You can now hit a button, find Walgreens, move your prescription from one town to the next if you forgot to do it. You can rent a car. You can, I use all my apps to do my travel. It's easier to book a flight on United on my little app than it is on the website. All right? And so if you don't put this into your model of where growth is coming from, you miss it. Okay? And one of the problems that we have is how we measure this stuff. And here's the point. It costs less to buy technology today than it did in the past. Did you know your iPad uses $1.36 of electricity every year? You know what your laptop computer uses? $8.31. You know that desktop clunker you got? $30. Everything's becoming cheaper to run, faster, more efficient, more productive and efficient for you. All right? I'd much rather have my iPad on my way walking down the street than a desktop computer. All right? And it costs me 1/20th to run it. And it's more powerful. And so the whole point I'm getting to is that this is what's causing growth today. And that leads me to my final point, and that is, okay, Wesbury, gosh, I mean, you're making me want to run out of here and buy app stocks or something, all right? All right, and you should, because we live in one of the most exciting times in the world. But okay, if that's the case, why are we the plow horse? Why are we the plow horse? Why aren't we booming? If it's so great, why aren't we booming? And the answer is really simple. The government's too big. The Federal Reserve is too big. And I started talking about the Fed, and I want to add this here at the end. The Federal Reserve this week, next week, it's this week, will release what they call CCAR. It's the stress tests of the banks. And they're going to tell all 30 banks in America, 30 banks, how much in dividends they can pay, how much stock they can buy back. In other words, what they're allowed to do with the profits that they made. Now, Ben Bernanke is really smart. I know he's retired from the Fed, but I'm going to use him anyway because it all started under him. He's really smart. He got his PhD when he was like 29 and a half, I don't know. And he teaches at Princeton, and he kind of knew the right people, and he was appointed by the president to run the Federal Reserve Board, which is a very important post. But he does not know how to manage a bank. It is not his job. He wasn't trained to do it. He shouldn't be doing it. But what's happened now is that the narrative is that the banks almost took us down, that the Federal Reserve saved us, and therefore the Federal Reserve has to protect us from all these greedy bankers who are going to just take us down again. And it's the same story we heard after the Great Depression, and I believe 2008 was another political Great Depression. When Rahm Emanuel said no crisis should go to waste, the federal government did not let it go to waste. They grew the size of the federal government, they grew the reach of the federal government, and there's lots and lots of Americans who have gone right along with it because they believe the narrative, the story that the banks almost took us down and quantitative easing and TARP saved us. It's wrong. In fact, I'm going to say this, I've said it before, TARP is the biggest mistake ever made by the Republicans in the United States in the history of the party. It violated free market principles. In fact, George Bush said, we had to violate free market principles to save the free market. You know what my only analogy to that is like me saying I had to kill that guy to save the 10 Commandments. That's crazy. It doesn't make sense on the face of it. The sentence doesn't make sense, but that was the justification that he used. And here's my point, that the Republicans, I've always believed that they stood for free markets. And in the clutch, if you believe in free markets, you believe in free markets. Right? That's what you believe in. So if you go violate free market principles, then you don't really believe in free markets. And so my belief is that by passing TARP and telling everybody that if they didn't pass it, the banking system would have collapsed, that they have undermined the complete philosophy of the Republican Party. There is no philosophy left. Because guess what? In the clutch, they're going to use government to save the world if they think that's what's needed, because they don't really, truly believe in free markets. And that brings me to the second point, and that is, hey, if you can't trust banks, then how can you trust insurance companies? So what's the difference between the Federal Reserve running banks and Obamacare running insurance companies? What's the difference? There is none. Now, you may want to politically try to make one, but there isn't one philosophically. Just because Obama's doing it versus Bush doesn't make Bush right and Obama wrong. All right? And so what I come back to here, my whole point of all of this, is that government has expanded dramatically, its spending has gone up, its regulation has gone up, and all of that is a burden on our economy. And if you don't like the plow horse, racehorse, let's just stick with the racehorse. You know, back in 1999, the economy was booming, the stock market was going up, new technology was creating tremendous new wealth, all this kind of stuff. We had a racehorse, we had a thoroughbred, and it had a 112-pound jockey on it. Under Bill Clinton, the size of our government was 18% of GDP. Today, it's 22% of GDP. So another way to say the same thing is now our racehorse, our thoroughbred's carrying a 200-pound jockey. And that 200-pound jockey is making us run slower. So you want to know why unemployment's up and standards of living aren't as improving as rapidly as they could? It's because we got a jockey that's overweight. And that's the government. And so that's why I believe that we're growing slow. But in spite of the big government, in spite of Dodd-Frank, in spite of Obamacare, in spite of all of free cell phones and welfare and Social Security disability and all of this stuff, entrepreneurs are still able to grow the economy. Corporate profits are at an all-time record high, and that's why the stock market's up, not because of quantitative easing and the Federal Reserve. So if you start with the right analogy, the right narrative about what happened in 2008, you end up in a much better place when you're analyzing the economy. And that's my encouragement to you today, is to think about what really happened in '08. Don't just take the government's word for it. And all I can tell you is the next time I'm standing on the 8th hole and somebody yells incoming, I'm not hitting the dirt. I'm going to drive anyway. So thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you, Roger.
We have several questions.
Okay.
Well, you can hear me at least.
Yep.
You mentioned the ways in which the media
You're coming through now.
have made too much of the recession, making it seem more severe than it really was. In light of this, what role did consumer confidence, or the lack thereof, play in worsening the recession?
Sure. Okay. So just for the record, the recession was awful. I mean, you
for some reason, with both of them on, we
interfere with each other. The recession was awful. We had a huge drop in jobs, in growth, in incomes, in all of that kind of stuff. Okay, no doubt about it. So I didn't say the recession wasn't bad. It was. What I really said was that it was caused by government overreacting to the crisis and not changing this rule mark-to-market accounting early enough. If we never would have put mark-to-market accounting into place, we never would have had the recession that we had it. All right. In fact, I believe Bear Stearns, Lehman, AIG, Fannie, Freddie, Wachovia, WAMU would all still be with us. They wouldn't have gone under. However, so to come back to consumer confidence, there's two ways I think about this. Number one, just from a general point of view as a forecaster, and I have done a gazillion pieces of statistical research, and it's almost every time I get a new intern or employee, young starting out economist, I make them do this, because it cures them. Go get consumer confidence data and use it to forecast the economy. And they always come back and invariably say you can't. It doesn't. It's not related. It's a lagging indicator at best. However, in '08, we had a true panic. We had a panic. So you could argue that consumer confidence fell with the panic, and a panic is that. It was a panic. We haven't had a panic in 100 years, not since 1907. And in a panic, the way you can tell a panic is food sales go down, grocery store sales. They actually fell. Which means you're like I said, you're sitting with your spouse. You go, at least we have each other. I mean, at least we have the pantry, because we don't. I don't want to go to the grocery store. Every dollar is dear. I'm scared, and so I always that third drawer down in your kitchen, way in the back, there's that can of Campbell's tomato and rice soup. Dust on the top. Every time you've moved since college, you put that thing in a box and took it with you. All right, you finally ate it. All right? That's a panic. All right.
You were just coming through okay?
I think you're up there a little bit.
Are we? Okay. Well, you were in your remarks actually pretty humble about your track record with predictions. You seem to have nailed quite a few things. So going forward, what should we be paying attention to now to have an idea of what's going to happen in our future?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I mean, the last 5 years especially have been uncanny, a little scary. And now other people are getting bullish. That scares me even more. And what I mean is I've been right for you can't be right forever. It's impossible as a forecaster. But the last 5 years have been good. But I believe the same thing that I said, in my comments after Dubai, BP oil spill, Cyprus, the market's still cheap. And the economy, the entrepreneur, is still growing. And then if you want to add some politics into here, the Republicans are keeping the House. No way they're going to lose the House. I mean, sure, lightning could strike and something, but by any regular analysis, there's no way they're going to lose the House. And I believe they're going to pick up a slight majority in the Senate. And that means President Obama is neutered. Or let me just say it the other way, and that is that President Obama's popularity rating is 37, 38, 39% right now. If he wants it to go higher, he has to learn a lesson from Bill Clinton and move right. If he doesn't move right, it stays low and he will get nothing done. So if you're worried about government interfering with the next couple of years, I'm not. And I've already said to you today, I don't think QE was something we should really, it didn't boost the economy. So even as they're tapering, I don't think it will hurt the economy. And so the bottom line is, today, I've been long stocks really long the last 5 years. When they changed mark-to-market accounting, I actually got, don't do this at home, it's not an advice. I levered long, all right, because I lost a lot and I wanted to get it back, and I levered long, and I'm still levered. And so the bottom line is the market's cheap. Profits they're not easy. As anybody in here who's a real entrepreneur who runs a business, profits are not easy to come by. But they are made by people today. In fact, extraordinary profits are being made, and I believe that will continue.
We had several questions on our national debt. To what extent has the dramatic growth of the debt, to what extent has that been a problem that's been exaggerated, or is that being underestimated in terms of the effect that that's going to have on our future?
Sure. So the debt itself. So lots of people, I will get in debates with people and sometimes, and they will just throw out the number 17 trillion, as if the debate's over. All right. It's so big. It's so huge. 17 trillion. You got to stop. No, you can't be bullish. 17. All right. Trillion. By the way, nobody knows what 17 trillion is, but nonetheless, they call them mego numbers. For my eyes glaze over, all right? It's like, what is it? All right, so here's the way I think of our debt today. We have $17 trillion in debt outstanding, but the U.S. has $17 trillion in GDP. And when you add up all the assets that we, private citizens in America, and our companies own or are in control of, or however you want to think of that, it's $200 trillion. All right? I mean, what would it take to replace Columbus, Ohio, Indianapolis, Indiana? I mean, these are trillion-dollar cities. I mean, when you add up all the houses, buildings, everything. I'm not even counting the roads in Yosemite and all that stuff. Just private assets. So then I lop a whole bunch of zeros off because nobody knows what, like I said, what a trillion is. So let's say you inherited from your grandparents a company with $200 million in assets, $17 million a year in income, and a $17 million bank loan. Would you be mad at your grandparents? No, you'd be filthy rich. The kids that are born in America today are the wealthiest kids born on the face of the earth. Except for the two that were born in Luxembourg last year, but we are. And I did not just say, for the record, I did not just say I'm happy the budget deficit is $600 billion, I'm glad we had $1.5 trillion deficit, I'm glad we have 17 trillion in debt. I didn't say that. I wish we didn't. I wish we had a surplus. I wish we weren't running deficits. I wish the government was a whole heck of a lot smaller. But we are so far away from being Greece that anybody who says 17 trillion and then runs for the hills is making a big mistake.
I don't think I've ever heard that message anywhere, so thank you. What do you believe Obama's economic legacy will be?
Yeah. What will his... It's progressivism. Obama's economic legacy is progressivism. He's single-mindedly pursuing a redistributive set of policies. We know where France has grown 2% a year, 2% GDP, 8% unemployment for 40 years now, 4 decades. They're used to it in France. So the entrepreneurs in France, there is some growth. There are some companies that are doing well in France. You can find them in any country, all right? But their standards of living haven't improved. They have more unemployment than they should. Their society's decaying from underneath, and that's the legacy. It's that he's doing, and we've tried it here before. They've tried it around the world. He's ignored all of that. So I would just say his legacy is trying to put Keynesianism and liberalism into action in America, and it's a failure. It already is pretty clear that it's a failure.
Last question. In the next presidential election cycle, what should the Republican Party's message be on the economy?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back and expound a little bit on my TARP comments. So Mitt Romney, I don't believe he ever had a chance. Now, I mean, I'm not going to analyze 47% comment and all this kind of stuff, but he never really had a chance, and I believe one of the key reasons was TARP, okay? Some people think I'm overstating it, I'm being too dramatic, but once we passed TARP, Republicans said, we believe that the government is here to fix things when the private sector breaks it up, when the private sector wrecks it. And so in reality, that message is no different than Democrats. I get it, there's some redistributive stuff and all of that. But in reality, they say free markets don't work. They don't work. They lead to volatility. That's why you need government. They rip people off. They're not fair. And government, he has to be here to keep them all in line, to keep the reins on them like the horse. And TARP, what's the difference? It's exactly what it was. Look, the banks almost wrecked us. We have to put $700 billion. I need a bazooka to save the world from the banks, from the greedy bankers. And so my belief, not that people went into the voting booth and said, TARP for Romney. They didn't say that. By the way, Paul Ryan voted for TARP. All right? Romney didn't. He wasn't in elective office at the time. But Paul Ryan did vote for TARP. And so what I think they went in and said, hey, they're the same. They're all the same. And then I'm gonna go on one more off of Romney. He did make the 47% comment, which I think just about everybody, we understand what he was trying to say. I just think he said it backwards. So here's if I was running, this is what I would do. This is my version of Paul Ryan's speech the other day. Right now in America, right now, 18% of all personal income is redistributed through the government. So we have wages, salaries, interest, dividends, profits, farm income, all that stuff we add up, and then you add in all the redistribution. And I'm talking Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, welfare, free cell phone, all of that stuff. 18%. So let's translate that into a real world concept. That means 18 people are in the wagon and 82 people are pulling the wagon. Now, by the way, 10 out of those 82 work for the government in the first place. So you could really put them in the wagon too, but let's not. Let's say they're productive. All right? All right. So you got 82 pulling the wagon and 8. We have never had 18 people in the wagon before out of every 100, ever. This is a record level, all right, in America. Now, two things I want you to think about this. Go back 150 years, right here, Knox County. Could, farming, agricultural area, a little bit of manufacturing showing up, some stuff like that. And could we have had 18 people in the wagon? No possible way. There wasn't enough extra to carry 18 people. We weren't wealthy enough. We could, now by the way, just so you know where I'm coming from, I believe that we are our brother's keepers. I've been taught that since I was a child, and I believe it's true, even after all my intellectual thinking about economics. We are our brother's keepers. We also are supposed to take care of widows and orphans, lack of a better way of saying it. All right? However, I don't believe that they number widows, orphans, and our brothers that actually need our help 18 out of every 100. Now, I don't know what you think. Do you think it's 17? Maybe you think it's 24. I don't think it's 18. I think it might be 5 or 6. But let's call it 10. All right? What that means, though, is that there's 8 people in the wagon that shouldn't be in the wagon. I also think that we were put on earth, we were born to be creators. We were put here in the image of our Creator. He's a creator. We're supposed to be creators. And being in the wagon means you are not creating, you are not serving your fellow man, you are living off of your fellow man. So you're violating the reason that you are here. And I believe that when you're in the wagon, when you're not supposed to be in the wagon, every day a little bit of your soul dies. And I'm worried not about, see, Republicans, they keep talking about how hard it is to pull the wagon. The stock market's going to go down, the economy's going to grow slow, businesses aren't certain. And that's what I hear. They're whining about pulling the wagon instead of caring about the souls of the people that are in the wagon that shouldn't be in the wagon. And I think when you whine, you lose. When you care, you win. Ronald Reagan cared. And he was able to say that without complaining about the 47% that weren't going to vote for him, instead of crying for the 47% that were having a little bit of their souls dies every day. And so if I were a Republican, that's the message I'd try to get out. That we need to care for those people, because if we don't, society will be undermined. It's happened everywhere in the world that it's been tried before. You cannot redistribute. You have to do what you're put here to do, and it's not to ride in the wagon. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That was very nice. Brian, thank you very much for being here. Maureen, anytime you have a speaker recommendation, you just let us know. Very good judgment there. Thank you. Hope to see you all on April 22nd for our next event with Justice French. Have a great afternoon. We'll see the Ashbrook Scholars in about 15 minutes in the Ashbrook Center.